Hey there, pirates. Welcome aboard the Anime No Me channel. When we look back at that moment when Shanks gives his arm to Luffy, as if he were handing over a promise, as if he were delivering a silent warning to someone who perhaps didn't even understand it yet, it becomes possible to see that the gesture was more than just a simple sacrifice to save a child. Maybe it was a reckoning. Maybe it was the point where Shanks decided to turn his back on something that had marked him since birth. Imu's mark, which might have been born alongside him, may have already been burning silently in the depths of his spirit long before he was old enough to understand what it meant to be a Figurland. If we piece together the details slowly, without rushing, it becomes easier to understand that the blood running through Shanks isn't just that of a free pirate. Maybe it never was. I hope for your support to help our crew win, and to do so, you just need to click the thumbs up button, leave a like, and subscribe to the channel. By doing this, you will win an incredible devil fruit, so just comment which fruit you want. Maybe Shanks came into the world with an invisible debt, sealed by someone who lives in the shadows of the empty throne. If his father truly is Garling Figurland, as everything seems to indicate, then Shanks was born into a lineage directly intertwined with the center of world power. The Figurland blood seems to be more than just nobility. It seems to be a direct link to Imu-sama's will, and that's where the mark comes in. Not an ordinary mark, not a tattoo, not something visible to the eyes, but a silent contract that perhaps Imu imposes on those born within the lineage of his most loyal instruments. And if this mark is something that activates when the bearer tries to stray from their purpose, maybe Shanks's arm wasn't taken by a sea monster. Maybe that was part of the price. Maybe the mark, if it truly exists, is like a reverse promise. If you try to deviate from what was laid out for you, something will be taken from you. And losing his arm at that moment could have been the symbol of Shanks's first rupture with that destiny. It's almost as if he were saying, without needing to say it, if I have to lose something so that this boy can live, then so be it. But there's more. Shanks's look at that instant, right after saving Luffy, wasn't a look of pain. It was a look of acceptance. He doesn't hesitate. He doesn't scream. He doesn't react like someone caught by surprise. He already knew. He accepted the loss. Maybe it wasn't just an arm he was giving up. Maybe he was letting go of something much bigger, of a place that had already been reserved for him, perhaps even a throne that, in another timeline, could have been his. If he bears that mark, as I believe he might, it may work as a seal, an ancient contract that links the bearer directly to Imu-sama, a silent pact, almost spiritual, where power and protection come at a cost. And if Shanks was born into this, perhaps his whole life he's been followed by the feeling that something is watching him, something that waits, something that collects. And when he was just a baby, maybe Imu's eyes had already seen him as yet another piece on the chessboard, a son of Garling, someone raised within the cold walls of the world that dictates the rules, but who ended up rescued or left in the care of Roger's pirates. And that changes everything, because if Roger took Shanks, then maybe he did it not just out of pity, but to try to save a child from a fate that was already written. That could explain why Roger and Rayleigh looked at Shanks with so much attention, as if they knew he wasn't just an ordinary boy. Maybe they knew about the mark. Maybe they even saw the first signs of it appearing. Shanks's quietness, the heavy silence he carries, the way he rarely talks about himself, all of that could be a reflection of someone carrying a secret too heavy to share. And yet he chose to live as a pirate, as a man of the sea, far from the halls of the Red Line, far from what awaited him as Garling's son. But the mark, if it's real, never went away. Maybe it's something that remains dormant, waiting for a reason to manifest. And when he saved Luffy, maybe that was it. The mark awakened and took his arm. It's almost as if Imu himself felt that gesture as a betrayal, as if he had said, "Are you protecting the boy who carries the spark of what I've been trying to extinguish for centuries?" And then, without saying anything, without moving armies, without sending the holy knights, he simply takes a piece of Shanks. Not as punishment, but as payment. And it's curious that Shanks' own brother, Shamrock, carries a visible mark, almost ritualistic. That mark that glows among the holy knights may be a stronger symbol than it seems. Maybe each of them has made a direct pact with Imu-sama, giving up something of themselves in exchange for power, longevity, or purpose. And Shanks, having been raised outside this system, perhaps never made this pact directly, but inherited part of it in his blood. Maybe the arm that was taken was precisely what he needed to symbolically cut that tie, as if to say, I no longer belong to this. But things are never that simple, because even after losing his arm, even after living the life of a pirate, he continues to visit important places, continues to speak with figures of power, continues to move with a freedom no other pirate has. He enters Mary Jawais. He talks to the Gorosei. He isn't treated as an enemy, maybe because in their eyes, he is still under the mark. Maybe they still see Shanks as someone who could return to serve. Maybe they see him as a card that can still be played. All of this makes me think that Shanks, despite everything he chose, still carries a debt to Imu-sama, a silent debt that doesn't need to be collected with words. And maybe he knows that one day the debt will come due. But until then, he tries to do what he can. He tries to prepare the world for the arrival of someone who can break this cycle. And that someone, of course, it's Luffy, because Shanks bet on him. He gave his arm for him. He placed the promise in him. And maybe Imu's mark, upon seeing this, understood that Shanks was passing the torch, that he had chosen another Joy Boy, that he had deviated from the path laid out, and the mark reacted, as if to say, then you will no longer be my instrument. You chose to be free, very well, here is the price. Maybe that's why Shanks never seeks revenge, never tries to reclaim his arm, never shows regret. He knew what he was doing. He knew who he was dealing with, and even so, he chose the boy. He chose to break away from the line of the throne and throw everything to the sea, along with that hat Roger passed on to him. Maybe that hat was more than just a symbol of freedom. Maybe it was a shield, a promise, an escape route from what was written. And if the Figurland blood runs in him, then he carries the key to something very ancient. Maybe that's why the world watches Shanks so carefully, because he's not just a pirate, he is a piece that escaped the board, a piece that was supposed to serve the throne, but chose to protect the future. And the mark he carries, visible or not, is still there, waiting. If we stop to remember how the story began, that very first scene that practically draws the spirit of One Piece, with Luffy being pulled by a Sea King and Shanks saving him in a silent but firm way, it's impossible not to wonder how exactly that happened. And the more time passes, the stronger the feeling grows that that scene was never just what it seemed to be. Because if we're honest, Shanks was already a monster back then. And if we think calmly, he definitely already mastered Haki. I even think he already mastered all three types. And if he had armament Haki, then it wouldn't make any sense for him to lose his arm that way. Not if he truly wanted to defend himself. Because if we think about it, armament Haki is precisely what allows you to harden your body or weapon and withstand attacks even from much stronger creatures. And if Shanks had already trained with Roger, if he was already facing the New World, if he had already confronted people from Cypher Paul, as we eventually discovered that he clashed with the government even before Luffy was born, then he knew very well what Haki was. And more than that, he knew how to use it. And if he knew how to use it, then that bite was something he could have stopped. And it doesn't stop there, because Conqueror's Haki, which Shanks masters at an absurd level, as we see when he repels Admiral Ryokugyu from afar with just his presence, was probably latent within him since the beginning of his pirate journey. Maybe he just didn't use it openly, but he definitely already felt it burning inside him. It's impossible to imagine that a guy like Shanks, with that heavy calmness in his eyes, with that gaze that sees far, didn't know exactly what he was doing at that moment when he extended his arm and gave it to the sea, or to something greater. Because to me, that bite was permitted. It wasn't a failure. It was a choice. And that's where everything starts to fit together. If Imu's mark exists, and if it follows the blood of the Figurland since they are born, then maybe Shanks felt that that was the right moment to take a step off the predetermined path. He could have used Haki. He could have destroyed that creature without any effort. He could have protected Luffy and still come out unscathed. But he didn't want to. He didn't try. He gave up his arm as if paying a price, as if saying, from here on, I go alone. And then you look at his face at that moment and you see there's no anger, no despair, no doubt. He is at peace. Because maybe he knew that what he was giving up there wasn't just a piece of his body. It was an old debt being settled, a kind of redemption. And maybe that mark, if it really is what I think it is, reacts to this kind of decision. Maybe it's like a flame that burns when the bearer steps away from the original mission. And by saving Luffy, by choosing that boy as the symbol of the new, Shanks was saying no to what was set for him. That was today's content. We hope you liked it and want to share your opinion on the subject. Don't forget to share the video, give it a thumbs up, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care and stay amazing.